guys, welcome to week 32. Hope you guys have been really enjoying the reading. We're in the home stretch. We are going to finish the Old Testament in about 7 weeks. So you're doing great. I want to encourage you to keep going. I want to hit a couple of things for this week. We're in Jeremiah, we're in Daniel. There's just an awful lot going on in these stories. We're moving up toward the captivity. And people's hearts are getting harder and harder. And so I wanted to touch on first Jeremiah 19, 12 through 13. God starts saying some really interesting things about a place called Tophet. And he says, "Thus will I do to this place, saith the Lord, and to the inhabitants thereof, and even make this city as Tophet. And the houses of Jerusalem and the houses of the kings of Judah shall be defiled as the place of Tophet. And because of all the houses upon whose roofs they have burnt incense to all the host of heaven, and have poured out drink offerings to other gods." And so God is saying here, I'm going to make Jerusalem like Tophet. I'm going to make the houses of Jerusalem like Tophet, the houses of the king of Judah. So what's Tophet? What is that? Tophet has a history. It's an area in Judah, and according to 2 Kings 23:10, King Josiah defiles this valley so that no one can make his son or daughter pass through the fire from Molech there. So part of the history of Tophet, it's actually a place where they would set up statues of Molech. And from what we know in antiquity, things that have been preserved and drawings that people have made since then, the statues of Moloch were large bronze statues, and that you would heat them up tremendously, put a fire inside them and heat them up tremendously. Then you would put a baby or a child on the arms, and it would roll into the statue itself and be burned to death. And so it's a really sick, disgusting thing to do. It's a sick, disgusting way to die. It's a horrible thing to do to another person. And that was what Tophet was famous for. We see in 2 Chronicles 28:3, King Ahaz burned his children in the fire there, and so did Manasseh. That's in 2 Chronicles 33:6. So Tophet actually means like a place of burning, and it was a place of burning, specifically the burning of children. And so when God looks at his people, he's looking and seeing them, and he's seeing a people group that is called by his name in the land that he's given them, ignoring the law that he has given them, and taking the children that he has given them and burning those children in the fire. And if that's a disgusting concept to us, how much more so to God? So what God says here, he says, I'm going to make you guys like Tophet. You guys have burned your children in the fire. And so I'm going to make your city a place where you get burned inside your houses. You're going to see that Jerusalem will become a place where children are burned alive inside of their houses, and you are burned alive inside of your houses, because I'm going to send a nation upon you that will be just as violent to you as you have been to your own children. And so he says this is basically Jerusalem and Judah. They're going to be like the entrance to hell, because Tophet was also thought of as an entrance to the underworld, an entrance to hell. So he says, because you've brought this into my land and you've practiced this, this is what you're going to become. So it's harsh, but it's also an advance warning. He's telling them beforehand, which means that they could potentially avoid it. If they don't avoid it, it's entirely their fault because they knew in advance. And we've seen lots of places in the Bible where God has spared his people because they have repented. And so what I see it as is God is telling them in advance, this is not something that's just going to happen out of the blue and they never knew about it. He's telling them from the beginning, I'm going to do this to you. And the idea is you have an opportunity to repent and put an end to this before it ever happens. And obviously we see that they don't. Next one, Jeremiah 31:15. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, for her children are no more. This is a famous passage specifically because of the New Testament, when Herod destroys the babies of Bethlehem. Why Rachel? Judah, Bethlehem of Judah, that doesn't come from Rachel. What's going on there when we look at that in the New Testament? Rachel, we see, is the mother of the tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. So that's because of Benjamin and Joseph. And when Jeremiah is talking about this, he's talking about Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they're no more. And that's because Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, a lot of those people have already gone into captivity with the captivity of the northern tribes. And so this will also come of the southern tribes, but Rachel is crying and weeping because her children are gone. The northern kingdom is already in captivity. So Rachel is weeping. But it also says that God has compassion on Ephraim in that same chapter, and that Israel will return to him. And so you see, like, Ephraim is already no more, but God is also going to bring Ephraim back because of his goodness. So he's talking about bringing his people back from exile. Matthew uses this to show Herod's cruelty and how it had already been foreshadowed since about 700 years previous. And then, although the original passage dealt with a different set of circumstances. And so sometimes when we look at prophecies in the Bible, we'll see them where they have an immediate context, and then we'll see where they have a messianic context or an apocalyptic context. And so it's something that God's talking about now, and it has a meaning for now, but it also has a greater application in the future as it's going to apply to Christ and Christ's return. And so that's kind of what's going on there. Another thing, looking at the story of Daniel, this was something that Dr. Kilpatrick brought up years ago when I was in Old Testament class with him. Daniel was most likely a eunuch. When we read that story, we don't really think about that, but it's really likely that he was a eunuch, and it sort of deepens our understanding of what it was that he went through, how painful captivity was for him, and also how incredible it is that he's not bitter. So a couple of possible evidences or clues that he might be a eunuch. One, Isaiah's prophecy in 2 Kings 20:17 through 18. He told Hezekiah that some of his sons would be carried away to captivity in Babylon and made eunuchs. Daniel is a descendant of the royal house. He's one of the sons of Judah. And so it actually says that they took a lot of the best men, the most handsome men of Judah, and they took them. And then they're given to the chief of eunuchs. That would be number 2. The chief of eunuchs is the boss of the eunuchs. He is Daniel's boss. This is not necessarily to say that Daniel has to be a eunuch, but it makes it very likely. He also assigns him a new name. So Daniel's being treated as a possession. This is someone whose identity is already not being respected or cared for, whose identity is being redefined completely. So it's very likely that if they're willing to give him a new name and just change that about him, they'd change other things as well. In Daniel 5, the queen of Babylon is much more familiar with Daniel than the king is. That would be highly unlikely in one of these cultures, especially where you have a harem. The women don't get out much. Literally, they don't. And so if there are men that are around them, the Babylonians and these other kings were paranoid that men would get into the harem and stuff would happen, and then there would be heirs that wouldn't be of the king's blood, and then the king would be killed, all of these kinds of things. There would be conspiracies. So your harem was the center of your power in a lot of ways. And so if Daniel is really familiar with the queen, it's likely that he was not a threat to the king. Number 4, Daniel is never documented as having a wife or children. So that's something that we see when he's arrested by Darius. He appears to be living by himself, praying every day, 3 times a day. There's not mentioned anybody living with him. And also when all of these guys conspire against him to have him killed, both in the reign of Darius and under the Babylonians, they never threaten his family or threaten to do anything to his family. We do see them and their families being thrown to the lions, for example, but we don't see any threat to Daniel's family. It doesn't seem like he had one. And so what? It's incredible, given this, the amount of isolation this man feels. He is a foreigner, alone, in a different country, forced to take on a new name, forced to take on a new a language. He can't speak his own language. He's never going to see his home ever again in his life. He's lost his family, his friends, all of the things that are familiar to him. It's like a missionary, but you get no choices and it's permanent. And so he's in this area. He doesn't appear to have a family ever in Babylon. He's incredibly isolated. And so it's incredible, one, that he shows no bitterness. We never see anything like that. And then he so totally devotes himself to knowing the Lord. Why? When you know the Lord, your future is bigger than your capacity to have children. When you know the Lord, your future is bigger than whether or not you're ever going to get married. Your future is bigger than whether you're going to be alone the rest of your life. When you know the Lord, He's bigger than all of those things. And he is capable of carrying you through all of those things. And we kind of see the payoff a little bit by the end of the book of Daniel. There are 3 times when God sends these angels to him, and the angel calls him, "O man greatly beloved." And that's who Daniel is to the Lord. And very few people in the Bible are specifically called beloved by God. But Daniel gets to hear that with his own ears. And also those angels, whenever he falls down, he's very weak, he's very old, they pick him up and they touch him. And so there are very few people in the Bible that actually get physical contact from the Lord or one of his representatives, and Daniel is one of them. And it had to have been so much more meaningful because of his isolation. So I hope that helps a little bit. Last one, Jeremiah 7:16, 11:14, and 14:11. God says, stop praying for these people. Why would God command a prophet to stop praying for people? One, he's hit a point of no return. The people have gone as far as they're going to go, and God knows that they're hard-hearted and they're not going to turn back now. So there's really no point in praying. 2, God's protecting Jeremiah's heart, I think. I've had an experience where I had a friend who was dying of cancer, and I prayed for her, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and I would get just so passionate and sad and scared, and I was always praying. There started to come times where it was just like God was saying, shh, shh, like this is gonna end. And one of the things that happened is it gave me peace. I knew she probably wasn't going to make it from the way that it seemed like the Lord was guiding me to be quiet in prayer. It gave me peace, and that it also made, it was good for my heart in a way because I wasn't carrying it. It wasn't going to be the passion of my prayer that made the difference in whether or not she lived. And I think that's what God's doing here in the book of in the Jeremiah, because it's not going to be the passion of Jeremiah's prayer that saves the day. It's not going to be how hard he prays or how much he prays or how much his heart breaks for the people. Their time is up. And there's a certain amount of protection from God, I think, in not letting Jeremiah carry that on himself. So I think that's what he's doing. So I hope this has been useful for you. I hope you have a great week.